moment. But this whole notion, when we talk about the etiquette with the clergy, and we think about the titles and the ways of greeting and the formalities and so forth, this brings up the whole kind of, it opens the realm, if you will. It opens up the whole realm of what we believe about the order of the priesthood. A few Sundays ago, I talked about the order of Melchizedek prior to the distribution of Holy Communion in the Divine Liturgy, and how all priests, according to St. Paul and others in the Scriptures, participate in the order of Melchizedek, the priesthood of Melchizedek, and how that opens that up. And it opens up this whole ethos, if you will, this understanding in the Orthodox Church of how we view the clergy. Because make no mistake, of course, we look at the clergy a little bit differently in Orthodoxy than perhaps other churches might or other traditions might. I forget which father said it, but perhaps it was a desert father who said, if you're walking on the street and on one side of the street is an angel and on the other side of the street is a priest, you stay on the side of the street in which the priest is, because you get the blessing from him. In other words, I mean, how amazing to even think, to even fathom that. You stay on the side of the street that the priest is on so that you can get his blessing, it is said. How incredible. How incredible. To think that the Holy Spirit, like any sacrament, which I talked about on Saturday night, how in any sacrament, the created is transformed. And in this beautiful way, a clergyman is transformed into something else. A layperson becomes a clergyman. There is a story that illustrates this that I think is so beautiful, and I'm going to continue my theme on Monday nights during Lent of talking about miracles. Who here has heard of Father Arseny? Karen does, because she bought me a book one time as a gift about Father Arseny. Father Arseny was a Russian priest that lived during World War II, and during World War II, and thereafter, he was arrested and thrown in a gulag by the communists, as were other members of the clergy and other teachers at seminaries in the Soviet Union in those days. And he endured harsh conditions, harsh conditions. He was in a labor camp just like everyone else. He did not have his vestments, even though he was an ordained priest. And he did not celebrate liturgy sacramentally anyway, because of course there was no worship going on at a concentration camp, in a gulag in this case, somewhere in the very remote regions of Siberia. He talked about how on the food there was the smell of kerosene, because they couldn't kill people outright, otherwise the international community would come down on the Soviets for prisoners of war and the like. But they kind of subtly overworked and underfed their prisoners so that they hoped that they would die in the camp. Despite all of this and the hard labor that they were given, carrying boulders and all kinds of things, and the violence that would break out amongst the prisoners, and how the Soviets would not stop it because they hoped, again, that they would kill each other. Nevertheless, his priesthood was noticed by some in the camp. And there were some who would start coming to him and asking him questions and saying, you know, we heard that you're a priest, old man. Can you tell me, what does this mean? And tell me what it means that God exists, and all these kinds of other things. And he would simply answer their questions. And if it was apparent that they were simply making fun of him, he wouldn't answer their questions. He would just go on. It's like, okay, well, you don't want to really listen. So he went about his business, and he was quiet and peaceful and didn't bother anybody. But eventually he started gathering a little group of disciples, kind of very, very quietly and subtly, not because he was going out and seeking disciples, but because people started recognizing that there was a grace about him. And they wanted to be close to him and hear answers to their prayers and answers to life. Well, one day a fight broke out that was very, very bad, and a young man who was defending Father Arseny, who loved Father Arseny and was a disciple of Father Arseny. I don't know if the argument was about religion or God or whatever, but he went up and started trying to get in the face of somebody who was not a believer in God or ridiculing that or whatever. Something happened, who punched who, but there was this big fight. And ultimately, Father Arseny went to pull his disciple out of there, but he and his disciple were caught by the guards because they saw them, I guess, closest, or who knows what happened. And they were taken outside to the most severe form of punishment that anyone could possibly imagine in the gulag. And that was solitary confinement in the snow. We're talking in 50 degrees below zero weather. And there was a very tight, very small metal box that both of them were thrown into, that they could barely fit in, probably. I don't know how big it was. Maybe it was big as the spot that I'm standing on here. But the young man, I don't remember his name. Father Arseny called him Alyosha, which is like Teknemu, like my child. They went to the metal box, and any human being would have lived maybe a mere minutes, maybe an hour, maybe 2 hours, who knows. The young spiritual child of Father Arseny began panicking and freaking out. And he said, "They've left us in here to die. And we are going to die right now, Father." And Father Arseny's response in his very calm and grace-filled way was, "No. God has finally given us an opportunity to pray. Because no one is going to interrupt us now." And he said, "Just start praying." And so he did. And Father Arseny did. And they kept praying and praying and praying. And very, very slowly, that cold metal box started to warm up and get a little bit brighter as well. Father Arseny's spiritual child at one point became too tired to pray anymore because he could still feel the cold outside, even if it was a little bit further away. And he says to Father Arseny, "Father, I think I'm getting too tired. I don't know if I can keep praying." And he says, "Don't worry, I will pray for both of us." And so he starts kind of passing out. But all of a sudden, he sees the priest that he is with, clothed in vestments, and a bright light coming out of him. He is in full vestments, and he is saying liturgical prayers of the church. And according to the account of this young man, again, true story, he didn't know exactly what was being said, but he said he remembered it from his childhood, when Christianity was still legal, from going to church with his grandmother as a boy. He says he remembered something of these prayers, something that he heard once upon a time the priest now saying. And all of a sudden, he saw two attendants to Father Arseny come on either side of him, also dressed in white, and they were angels. His spiritual child passed out. He doesn't know how long Father Arseny was praying for, but he prayed and prayed. And all of a sudden, unbeknownst to him, everything was warm. A little bit later, he heard the guards' voices again. And the guards were saying, "How on earth could we have left them in here this long? Can you believe if anyone finds out we've left them in this box for 2 days, what they'll do to us in Moscow or what they'll do to us in other countries?" They opened the box, and both were alive with just a little bit of snow on their clothing, a little bit. They brought them back inside. The guards had no explanation, and all the prisoners acted as if they had come back from the dead. Many witnesses saw this. There was never any explanation given at the camp, of course, but those who had faith knew what had happened. Now, that miracle took place not just because Father Arseny was a priest, but because he was a saint. I don't know if he's been canonized in Russia yet. If not, I'm sure it's coming. But nevertheless, at that moment where it was most dark and bleak, that boy saw vestments on his priest and heard prayers being said by the priest in the most dire of circumstances. And so, my brothers and sisters, yes, the church is holy. And yes, we are all baptized and chrismated, Orthodox Christians, and we believe theologically that there is something that St. Peter refers to in his epistle, in one of his 2 epistles, as the priesthood of all believers, a royal priesthood. The priesthood of all believers actually is the way the Protestants term it, but the word in the scriptures is a royal priesthood. That is, all of the faithful make up a priesthood. And yet, in addition to that priesthood, there is this priesthood. There is the priesthood of the order of Melchizedek, which also is referred to. And this is very powerful. The sacrament of ordination is very powerful and filled with grace. It is not because the individual human has done anything to be worthy of this grace. Far from it in many cases, like mine. It is the Holy Spirit, however, just like in baptism, the bread and wine, the olive oil, the man and woman who come forward to the altar, just like all of the sacraments, the penitent, just like all of the sacraments, there is a grace that descends upon the matter that is brought forward, the creature, the created that comes forward and transforms it into something else. And this is very powerful. I will simply conclude by offering the words that God told Moses on Mount Sinai when he was establishing this priesthood. And that is, he shall be holy to you, because I, the Lord your God, am holy. When I give you these priests, he was saying. And that is how the Levitical priesthood began, starting with Moses' brother Aaron. Anyway, thank God all of these sacraments exist for the benefit of all the faithful and to bring God's grace and peace to all of us for our benefit and for our salvation. Kali Anastasi, have a wonderful evening, and God bless you. And once again, Axios.